Welcome back to the Brawn Body Podcast. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to be talking about sucralose, the artificial sweetener, and we're going to be talking about high-intensity interval training, or HIIT, as it's commonly called, specifically HIIT microcycles. So I've got a few really good articles lined up that I'm excited to walk you through and kind of arrive to a general consensus on both of these topics. So with that, we're going to start by diving into artificial sweeteners. And I think I've talked about these in some past podcast episodes, but essentially artificial sweeteners are modified forms of sugar that are indigestible. So the body does not absorb these, it does not digest these. The belief is that they just pass through unharmed. So you get the sweeter taste sensation without any kind of impact on the body. Well, we know that's not entirely true. There's a whole host of research that links artificial sweeteners to gut problems, basically just destroys your microbiome and your gut health, among other things, such as certain types of cancers and even different neurological diseases and many others. Now, among artificial sweeteners, the most common one we see specifically in the health and fitness realm is sucralose. It's very difficult to find supplements that do not contain sucralose. I only consume supplements that do not have sucralose. So you're looking for the naturally flavored, naturally sweetened stevia variations on things, not sucralose. And I know there's debate on if stevia is, a health food or not. But the way I look at it is it's plant-based, it's natural, it was less processed, it did not come from a lab, whereas sucralose was produced in a lab-based setting because they have to artificially modify sugar to produce it. So again, artificial sweetener. So this is actually published in March of 2020, so pretty recent. And it was published in Cell Metabolism, and it is called Short-Term Consumption of Sucralose with, but not without, carbohydrate impairs neural and metabolic sensitivity to sugar in humans. So the title kind of gives away what you're going to be looking at with this article, right? So basically, insulin sensitivity, which remember, insulin is that key storage hormone for your body. So we secrete insulin in response to something like a meal, especially high carbohydrates, and it allows us to store different macromolecules like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, that sort of thing in our body. Now, insulin sensitivity specifically is how your body responds to that insulin. So if you have an ideal amount of insulin sensitivity, a good insulin sensitivity would be you don't need to secrete much insulin to have a good effect. So you get a lot out of a little, if that makes sense. What we often see is insulin sensitivity becomes compromised, causing and contributing to various metabolic conditions such as obesity and diabetes. So essentially, if you have to secrete a lot of insulin in response to a little amount of carbohydrate or a small meal or something along those lines, then you have some insulin dysfunction, you have issues with your insulin sensitivity, and metabolic dysfunction as a result, because you have to secrete a lot more hormone than you should have to get the same result. So your body has to work harder. It's inefficient. And again, that's not how we want to function ideally, because as we said, it contributes to disease. So this study was looking at combinations of the sucralose with carbohydrate, sucralose on its own and carbohydrate on its own, and how that impacts insulin sensitivity. So as the study said, basically the impact of sucralose on insulin sensitivity when it's straight sucralose, only sucralose, is the same as straight carbohydrate. So they are one and the same from the research purposes. Cool. However, the combination of sucralose and carbohydrate significantly impairs insulin sensitivity. So on their own, they basically do the same thing, regardless of caloric content. Because remember, 1 gram of carbohydrates contains 4 calories. Sucralose technically contains 0. However, this study showed that they are doing one and the same thing. But together, they're having that very detrimental effect on insulin sensitivity. And essentially, they're linking the metabolic impairment of the impaired insulin sensitivity to decreased neural responses to sugar. So what that means is impaired insulin sensitivity, right? You consume the sugar, you consume the carbohydrate, and your nervous system, which your neuroendocrine system, they're kind of tied one and the same together. We talked about that in the neuroscience podcast. Basically, there's issues higher up. So in general, we know that consuming high sugar diets is typically a bad thing, and that leads to different things like obesity, diabetes, that sort of thing. And people look for these diet drinks, they call them, that are sweetened with the sucralose instead of the carbohydrates. So that's where you see the significance with the sucralose is, people are looking at this thinking it's a healthier alternative, but in reality, we're not there yet, I don't think. So giving you some of the specifics from one of their graphics, I really like this one. So as we said, the sucralose was calorically free, and they were giving the study participants that consumed just the carbohydrate 120 calories, so 30 grams of straight sugar. Doesn't that sound nice? And again, they had literally the same effect. So from a physiological standpoint, even though the sucralose had no calories to it, because as we claim, the body is indigestible, the body cannot digest it, it had the same impact on blood sugar and insulin sensitivity as the straight sugar did. Now, the combination of the sucralose with the carbohydrate. Now, the one thing I didn't like in this study is the combination used maltodextrin, which is a type of corn sugar. Well, the straight carbohydrate group used sucrose, which, as you know, is just simple sugar. So I don't know why we changed the carb source between those two groups. Just kind of a little inconsistency. But clearly, the combination was not only detrimental to insulin sensitivity, but detrimental to blood sugar levels. And I often think about this because think of how often you consume a high carbohydrate meal with a artificially sweetened meal or food item or something along those lines. So what I mean by that is these artificial sweeteners like sucralose are in everything. Supplements, food items, protein bars, drinks. They kind of sneak into so many different places. And how often are you consuming something like that with a high carbohydrate meal? So maybe it's your protein shake after you work out, and maybe you're having that with your breakfast or whatever meal you're eating. And since the modern American diet is very high in carbohydrates, odds are you're coupling that sucralose artificial sweetener with some form of carbohydrate. Now, say you're out to eat, right? Maybe you go to McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's or one of these other fabulous small local restaurants that are allowed to be open during the pandemic. Basically, you go there and you could get your Diet Coke or Diet Soda or whatever, and pair that with something else from the menu, right? So maybe you get your diet drink and you get a Big Mac and fries, but you have to get dessert, right? It's the one time you go there and the McFlurry machine is working, so you get one of them too, right? Gotta have dessert. Well, you're basically coupling a ton of sugar with a ton of artificial sweetener, and not to mention all of the other downsides of, the quality of fast food and that sort of thing. And, a lot of people look at the state of the country right now and they're asking, okay, why are we here? Why are we in this situation? And so many people are very quick to point out, well, this person didn't wear a mask this day, so it's their fault. Or, oh, those people got together, it's their fault. No other country is struggling with the pandemic as much as we are. And, I saw this thing earlier about Japan, how Japan never went into a shutdown or a lockdown, and they've had less than 1,000 deaths and that sort of thing. And as you may know, Japan is one of the healthier countries in the world. They have very good health and health outcomes and that sort of thing. And part of the reason, I think, is the way they approach their food supply and what they eat. They eat very clean, very healthy, and when you compare that to the modern American diet, a lot of people here are not eating healthy. Hot dogs, chicken nuggets, that's not healthy. Most of our, when you go to the grocery store, if you're buying regular ground beef or, regular chicken, regular eggs, that stuff is coming straight from feedlots. It's coming from commercial farms, not, local sustainable agriculture farms, not free range, cage free, not grass fed, grass finished, organic. And I don't think people understand how important it is to be putting the right meats and right foods into your body and how detrimental the wrong fuel can be. And it's not just the meat, it's everything. Looking at the vegetables, there's a huge outrage against the plant-based burgers because they're actually more harmful to the environment than the regular beef burgers. It takes more carbon emissions, so basically more... I'm trying to think of the exact word I'm looking for. I don't have my notes on this right in front of me at the moment. But essentially, you're having more of a detrimental impact on your carbon dioxide emissions. I think that's what I was looking for. To produce one of these plant-based burgers than you would a regular beef burger. And they're worse for your health, but they're being marketed as a healthy alternative because they're plant-based. And I actually had a conversation about plant-based foods with someone earlier because I tend to fall into a keto or paleo kind of approach to eating. And I don't think many people realize that, they think if it comes from a plant, it's good for them, it's healthy. But I don't think that always holds true. So we'll break this down one by one. We'll start with bread. So a lot of people say, bread, it comes from a plant, right? Wheat, whole grain, therefore it's good for you. It's healthy. It has 2.5 grams of fiber per slice, therefore it's healthy. It's good for my heart, right? But they don't look into the research about the effects that gluten has on the body. And this is not just for people with celiac disease, but all people. A lot of people are gluten intolerant or have gluten sensitivities, even though they're not diagnosed with celiac disease. And that's a problem because they're going to keep putting the gluten into their body, and their body's not going to like that. And it's going to respond with a lot of bad things, increased inflammation of the gut lining specifically. We see expansion of the gap junctions in the gut itself, so in the intestines, and that creates what we call a leaky gut situation where the food that you've broken down and digested and is in your intestines has the potential to leak out into the rest of your body. And that is gross and disgusting and a problem. And again, that ties into the systemic inflammation that we talked about in last week with the corona there, the CK word kind of thing that seems to keep getting me censored for some reason. But essentially, as you increase systemic inflammation, your body is going to have a lot of issues. So whenever there's inflammation, we usually use it as a signal to tell our body where to heal. So if you exercise, your muscles are probably going to be inflamed after you exercise, and that's good because your body knows to send nutrients and repair things such as amino acids for the muscles to that area of inflammation. Well, imagine what your body would be doing if you had systemic inflammation, meaning you are inflamed all over. Think of, we're sending one fire truck to the fire scene, right? One fire truck shows up and the whole block is on fire. Okay? That's basically what your body is trying to do and how it's trying to deal with systemic inflammation. It's fighting a uphill losing battle. And we know that grains and whole wheat and bread and gluten specifically tie right into that. And yet we continue to market it as a health food. So with that, I'm just going to go to vegetables as a whole and paint them with a very broad brush. So there are some vegetables we know that are very good for us. Example, sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are a great food, and I think most people would agree that everyone should be consuming sweet potatoes. Great. But downside, raw potatoes contain cyanide and can kill you. So you have to cook them and prep them. Now, with that, most vegetables contain a variety of different defense mechanisms. Vegetables do not want to be eaten. They do not want to be consumed. Fruits, on the other hand, have evolved to be eaten and to be consumed. So they actually reproduce when animals eat them because they eat the seeds and then they're dispersed elsewhere. So fruits need something to eat them in order to reproduce. And as such, they've evolved. They taste sweet. They taste good. They're seasonal. People typically like fruits, and there's pretty much always a lot of seeds. Think about your typical strawberry, for example. Now, again, going back to the vegetables, they have those plant defense mechanisms, and we don't fully understand all of them. We're still learning because plants are pretty complicated. We don't know all the different effects that they're going to have on our body. Because, let's face it, if we're going to eat a vegetable, it's no longer plugged into the ground, right? It's no longer growing. So are the various plant hormones and defense processes and toxins still active when we eat it or not? There's not a whole lot of research that indicates one way or the other. Now, as such, it's kind of interesting how we market vegetables and plant-based things as, these big health foods when we haven't looked into the full story on them. So I usually recommend doing some kind of preparation and prep into whatever vegetable you're going to consume before you consume it. So, for example, you might kind of cook spinach instead of eating raw spinach. You might ferment different things or soak or sprout different things. So going back to the grains, if you're going to consume grains, they typically recommend sprouted grains instead of just whole grain, that sort of thing. Just kind of makes it easier on your body if you are going to consume them. So just trying to do different things when and where you can to shut down the plant defense mechanisms. And again, this is kind of a gray area because there's not a whole lot of research that I've seen. There's not a whole big wealth of knowledge and evidence about this stuff. If anyone knows anyone who's studied plants and their consumption and impacts on the human body extensively, please let me know. I'd love to have them on the show to do this a little more justice than I'm doing. But essentially, that's our little take on food. I know we started on sucralose and now we're ending with vegetables and whole grains. But yeah, a little bit of a tangent, but a productive and a good one at that. So going on to high intensity interval training. So we're going to look at HIIT shock microcycles used for enhancing sports performance. So this sounds like something that everyone's going to really enjoy, right? So HIIT is pretty popular, especially right now with home workouts and that sort of thing becoming a big thing. HIIT is very popular for improving cardiovascular fitness as well, and it tends to maintain muscle mass better than if you were doing, long duration, steady state kind of cardio. So we use that HIIT strategy in athletes to, again, improve overall athletic fitness, endurance, sport-specific performance, that sort of thing. And your traditional HIIT kind of workouts usually use multiple microcycles, so 7 to 10 days, where they'll use 2 to 3 HIIT sessions each day. So think about your stereotypical high school 2-a-days conditioning practices, that sort of thing. And they typically look at that from a research standpoint. They find that HIIT is going to give you maximal benefits at about 6 weeks. So if you did those different microcycles, so 7 to 10 days of HIIT, rest period, and then repeat for 6 weeks, you would be noticing some rather substantial benefits. And it's interesting because I've actually done a little self-experiment with Martin Gabala's 60-75 interval workout before. And I've noticed that just after doing it 2 or 3 times, I'm stronger and faster and more in shape from a HIIT standpoint, if that makes sense. It's brutal and it's very difficult, but it gives you results rather quickly and easily. So going back to the study now and more on HIIT, basically they've looked at recent years. We're seeing kind of a shift with HIIT where they use higher frequency of HIIT sessions with different intervals of microcycles. So we use these HIIT shock microcycles. And you might have heard me or seen me talk about these before. I know this is a common thing I use with some of my clients where we'll build in these HIIT sessions throughout their day at strategic times to increase their conditioning level. So it might be a quick 5-minute HIIT session that they're doing 4 or 5 times a day for a week or two to really ramp up their cardiovascular fitness or to increase caloric expenditure during the day, that sort of thing. But essentially these microcycles could be used as a periodization approach to HIIT and cardiovascular endurance. And this is a huge tool that we could use in athletics. So in this article, they went through a lot of different things that we're going to talk about, such as the formatting and design of a optimal microcycle in their in their terms, the effects of HIIT on performance and endurance, different ways that they can improve their models, that sort of thing. So with that, we're going to break this down one by one. So the first section here, just looking at their definition of HIIT and sustainability of HIIT in athletes. So basically they're looking at these short training blocks, as we talked about, that are implemented to provide high stimulus for endurance adaptation specifically. So they're looking at periods shorter than 28 days. So you don't want to be doing this for a long period of time, or you could also do it in a ratio format where they do basically 2 or less of these HIIT sessions every 3 days. So basically 2 on, 1 off, or 1 on, 2 off. That probably varies based on intensity. Obviously, higher intensity, you're going to want more time to recover and that sort of thing. And they've even worked up to 11 sessions in a 6-day period, followed by 5 to 7 days of rest. So there are a variety of different ways you can approach this, and this is great from a training standpoint because you can kind of do what works for you, whether you're a trainer, a coach, whatever. You could do like we said, a whole periodization, so 3 to 4 weeks of HIIT. You could do a mini cycle, like we said there, where we do like 11 or 12 sessions in 5 or 6 days. Or you could even do that ratio and kind of sprinkle it in throughout everyday life for a longer period of time. So there's a lot of freedom to modify this, and there's a lot of different models. And basically, as we said, these can go up to twice a day. So you could do a AM, PM, that sort of thing. So we've got a little chart here I'm going to walk you through. The way they're looking at the AM, PM approach here, if we're doing 2-a-days, you would do 3 days of HIIT in the morning for the start, right? Get the athlete or the client or whoever adjusted and used to the HIIT workout. Then after the 3rd day, take a day off. Day 5, hit them with both a AM and PM HIIT session. So we do our 2-a-day. We don't see another 2-a-day until day 12. So in a 12 or 13 section, or 12 or 13 day cycle, we're looking at 2 or 3 2-a-days max. And we're looking at 2 or 3 rest days, and the rest would be 1 per day HIIT sessions. Looking at the sustainability with that a little more. Basically, HIIT is intensive, and the article very quickly recognizes that it is very easy to put an athlete in a state where they're overreaching or overtraining as a result of HIIT, and you need to allow time to recover and let these adaptations really take hold. And that's why they acknowledged that they built in the rest days to their different programmings. So they looked at different levels of physical stress here, and they referenced some different studies for this. So in one that they referenced, they looked at 15 HIIT sessions over 14 days. So 14-day period, 2 weeks. We put 15 sessions in there, and it reduced energy. They looked at different wellness scores and scales and outcome measures and that sort of thing. And they lost, basically, the study participants were mentally not in as good of a place. They were tired, they were fatigued, they were not as willing to train after doing that, which obviously that's a lot to push through. So with that, it's important to know that you have to allow for recovery to occur, because HIIT is a very highly demanding, highly intense form of training. Now, there are a lot of great physiological responses to HIIT. So this is one of the most effective ways to increase your VO2 max, lactate threshold, and movement economy. And one of the key things for this, in what I've seen separate from this article, is mitochondrial biogenesis. And I think Martin Gabala gets into this a little bit. Essentially, HIIT is an exhausting activity for your heart, your lungs, and your body as a whole, because it has to speed up, slow down a lot. It's difficult, and your body is going to respond and adapt accordingly. So one of the ways it does this is by signaling your cells to make more mitochondria. So now you have more mitochondria, which, as you know, are the powerhouses of the cell, the energy producers. So now you have the ability to produce more energy. And that energy can be used for a variety of processes, such as getting rid of waste or continuing to fuel whatever endurance activity you're looking into, which, as you know, is a good thing. Another key thing is not just the creation of new mitochondria, but improving the ones you already have. The existing mitochondria in the body become bigger and they function more effectively and efficiently. In a lot of different metabolic diseases, as we've talked about, there is a hallmark theme of mitochondrial dysfunction. There's something wrong with their energy system and energy production and energy utilization that ties into their mitochondria. So the fact that HIIT can be used to kind of clear this up and cause a variety of adaptations to the cardiovascular and pulmonary system. So improved blood flow, improved resting heart rate, improved VO2 and VO2 max. So essentially, you're improving the amount of oxygen you can use at your maximum threshold, which obviously the more oxygen you can move through your body, the more you're going to be able to work, because that will enable you to get rid of more carbon dioxide waste, that sort of thing. So they've shown in this study that HIIT is more effective than steady state, which matches, again, Martin Gabala's work, where Martin Gabala is one of my favorite exercise physiologists as far as endurance training goes. And his research has shown 10 minutes of high-intense intervals can give you the equivalent of 5 hours of steady-state cardio. So again, these intervals and these shock sessions are very powerful tools that you can add to your training arsenal and your athlete's arsenal, again, if it's implemented properly. That key there of, recovery continues to show itself up or reappear. So highly recommend keeping tabs on that. So looking at a application here. So let's say we're looking at a team sport that involves endurance, field hockey, lacrosse, soccer, that sort of thing. How would we put together a training program for a athlete that fits that field sport kind of category that uses these HIIT microcycles? What would we see? So they actually broke this up into a little calendar here. So they start with a continuous protocol. So working our way down this table here. And if you need this article, let me know. I will see if I can get that for you. So they have 5 different HIIT protocols lined up, and they break it down into sets and interval duration in minutes. So kind of like in the weight room, you think of sets and reps. Here we're thinking of sets and time. So they start with 4 sets of 3-minute intervals. Then they do a 2x8, 3x3, 4x4, and 2x7. So there's a few different breakups there. And then they talk about the intra-set work. So for the first one there, the 4x3, you're going at a continuous rate of speed for 3 minutes. Your goal is to keep your heart rate above 90% of your heart rate max. And then your rest period, which is 3 minutes. So you're in a 1-to-1 rest to work ratio. And your rest is to be either, it's low intensity is basically what they're getting at, is low intensity jogging, walking, that sort of thing. So something lighter. The 2x8, which would be, their next progression here, is 2 sets of 8 minutes in those 8 minutes, you're doing 15 seconds hard, 15 seconds medium, and you're looking for over 100 of your, I'm not sure what unit they're using there, but you're looking at extreme intensity here with the 2x8. And then you're rewarded with 10 minutes of rest in between. So that's kind of a good thing because, if you're going 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off for 8 minutes, you're going to need a little time to rest and recover after that. Next, they did the 3x3, as we mentioned, and here they're looking for a 7-second burst all out. So think about that 100-meter sprint kind of speed, 50-meter sprint kind of speed, all out, followed by 20 to 25 seconds of medium intensity. So all out medium intensity, that sort of thing. And then you get the 10 minutes to recover in between sets, and same thing there, low intensity, that sort of thing. So this is the kind of thing that if you're a coach, you would probably need a stopwatch and a whistle for, or to program it into different sport watches and that sort of thing. For the next one, they did a 4x4 continuous pace. So instead of the 4x3, they just added a minute to that. It's identical. One thing with that, your rest period between sets is still 3 minutes. So instead of a 1-to-1 work-to-rest ratio, now you've got a 4-to-3 work-to-rest ratio. So the scales have kind of tipped the other way, and you have more time to work and less time to recover. And the last one I think I mentioned was the 2x7, where for 7 minutes you're doing 20 seconds on and 20 seconds at a medium intensity. So you're going nearly all out for 20 seconds and then kind of recovering a bit, but not a full light recovery. I mean like a, still jogging, moving kind of recovery. That one, they give you 3 minutes between sets, and your recovery is supposed to be passive. So just not a whole lot of anything going on. And I realized that was probably hard to keep track of. Their table in here makes it a lot easier to understand and digest. But basically the way they break down implementing these workouts is on the first day you do both A and B. So you do the 4x3 and the 2x8. Day 2 you do the C workout, so a 3x3. And then day 3 you have off. And then they go into workout D and so on from there. So basically that cycle goes A, B, C, off, and then progresses from there. So on day 1 you're doing A and B on the same day. There's your 2 a day. Day 8 you're doing A and B on the same day. Again, there's 3 full rest days built into that 13-day cycle. And after those 14 days are up, they do a week of recovery from the HIIT because, again, this is intense. So looking at it more from an endurance standpoint, so maybe more cross-country, track and field, triathlete, that sort of thing. Essentially, instead of changing the rate during sets, we're looking at more continuous. So they break this up into a 5x6 minute, a 4x4 minute, a 6x5 minute, and a 6x200. And they're all at continuous rates of speed. They're all at 90% your heart rate max or above. And the intra-set recovery time ranges from 2 to 10 minutes. I think 10 is a little bit long personally, but going with the 2 theme, 5 sets of 6 minutes, that's 30 minutes. If you did 2 minutes of recovery in there, that's 40 minutes. A 40-minute run for most people is nothing that are in the, cross-country and triathlete kind of world. So I really like the concept that this article presents using high-intensity interval training as a periodized approach to endurance training. And I think this will make endurance training more effective and efficient. And, this article literally ends with the practical application that coaches should consider implementing at least 2 HIIT sessions every 3 days for at least 7 to 21 day periods. And, this is something that they want to see as part of the preparation in an athlete's training protocol and conditioning. And, this is something that I think was commonly missed in high school sports because we didn't have the best knowledge of intervals and their effectiveness. So, key takeaways from this episode is if you're going to consume something with sucralose, then make sure it is not being consumed with carbohydrates, because sucralose plus carbohydrates equals bad. And do high-intensity interval training. Try and do at least 2 workouts every 3 days for a period of 7 to 21 days. So kind of like that microcycle there, and use that as a periodized approach to your endurance training to help you skyrocket your endurance gains. So with that, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Brawn Body Podcast. Thank you as always for listening and supporting our show. If you like what we're doing, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. And make sure you follow us on social media at Brawn Body, Brawn with a W, on all platforms. Thank you again for listening. See you next week.